Snowstorms don't arrive quietly. They erase roads, silence signals, and turn familiar places into empty white spaces. In the middle of a snowstorm, direction disappears, and panic sets in fast. Tonight, you will hear 10 real horror stories that happened during snowstorms. Moments when the storm itself became the greatest threat. Story 1. Whiteout on the highway. I should have known something was wrong when the radio died. Not static, not interference, just silence, like someone had reached through the dashboard and ripped out the wiring with their bare hands. The highway stretched ahead into the Nevada desert, empty and endless, and I was completely alone when the first snowflake hit my windshield. In August, the temperature gauge still read 92 degrees. The sky had been clear blue just 30 seconds earlier, but now, fat white flakes were falling so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as the world around me dissolved into white. This wasn't natural. Nothing about this was natural. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, pushing through the desert on Interstate 95, heading from Las Vegas to Reno for a job interview I couldn't afford to miss. The road had been mine for the last hour. No other cars, no trucks, just me, the asphalt, and the creeping realization that cell service had vanished about 20 miles back. The snow was coming down sideways now, a horizontal wall of white that swallowed the road markers, the shoulder, everything. I slowed to 30 miles per hour, then 20, my heart hammering against my ribs. The headlights barely penetrated the whiteout. It was like driving through static, through television snow, through the space between channels where nothing exists. That is when I saw the first shadow. It moved across the road about 50 feet ahead, a dark shape that was too tall to be human, too fluid to be an animal. My foot hit the brake instinctively, and the car shuddered but held the road. The shadow disappeared into the white wall on the opposite side of the highway. I sat there, engine idling, windshield wipers beating frantically against the impossible storm, trying to convince myself I'd see nothing. The fear was already crawling up my spine like cold fingers. I should have turned around. I should have stopped and waited it out. But the terrifying truth was I had no idea where I was anymore. The last town, a forgotten nothing place called Silver Ridge, had been 40 miles back. The GPS had stopped working when the radio died. And now this whiteout, this impossible blizzard in the middle of summer in the desert, had erased every landmark, every reference point. I was lost in a place that shouldn't exist. The wipers kept beating their rhythm. Left, right, hypnotic and maddening. I pressed the gas gently, crawling forward through the storm. The asphalt beneath my tires felt wrong somehow. Too smooth, like I was driving on ice or glass. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but stopping meant staying in this nightmare, and moving meant maybe, possibly, finding a way out. That's when the headlights caught something on the side of the road. A car pulled over onto the shoulder, or what should have been the shoulder. A sedan, maybe 10 years old, covered in snow that looked weeks old despite this storm starting just minutes ago. The driver, his door hung open. The interior light was on, casting a weak yellow glow into the churning white. I stopped parallel to it, my hands shaking on the wheel. Something dark was smeared across the driver's window. Something that looked too much like handprints, like someone had been clawing at the glass from the inside, trying to get out. Or trying to keep something else from getting in. The car was empty. No one in the driver's seat. No one in the back. Just those horrible handprints and the door hanging open like a mouth screaming into the storm. I should have kept driving. God help me, I should have kept driving. But I rolled down my window, just a crack, and shouted into the whiteout. The storm swallowed my voice instantly. What came back wasn't an echo. It was something else, a sound like breathing, deep and rhythmic, coming from everywhere at once. From the storm itself, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I hit the gas, my tires spinning for a horrible second before catching, and I accelerated away from that abandoned car and whatever had happened to its driver. The breathing followed me. It was in the wind, in the snow, in the spaces between my own panicked breaths. A presence moving through the whiteout, keeping pace with my car no matter how fast I pushed the accelerator. 40 miles per hour, 50. The visibility was near zero, but the terror was absolute, and terror makes you do stupid things. That's when my headlights found the motel. It appeared out of the storm like a mirage, like something my mind had conjured from desperation. The Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, according to the flickering neon sign. A long, low building with maybe 15 rooms. Their doors painted turquoise that had faded to the color of old bruises. One car in the parking lot, covered in the same impossible weeks-old snow. The office light was on. I pulled in fast, my tires crunching over snow that shouldn't exist, and killed the engine. The breathing in the storm grew louder, more insistent. Through the windshield, I could see shapes moving in the white, tall and wrong, circling the parking lot like sharks circling prey. I ran for the office door. My shoes hit the snow and I nearly fell, because it wasn't just snow. There was something underneath it, something that moved and shifted, something alive. I didn't look down. I couldn't look down. I grabbed the office door handle and it was unlocked and I threw myself inside, slamming it behind me. The sudden silence was deafening. No wind, no breathing, just the hum of ancient fluorescent lights and the smell of dust and old coffee. The office was small, cramped, with wood paneling that might have been fashionable in 1973. A desk with a register that was probably older than me. A rack of faded tourist brochures for attractions that no longer existed. And behind the desk, an old man watching me with eyes that were too bright, too aware. He smiled. It wasn't a comforting expression. Caught in the whiteout, he said. Not a question, a statement. Like he'd been expecting me. Like he'd been expecting someone. I nodded, my breath still coming in gasps, my mind racing. What is this? What is happening out there? The old man leaned back in his chair, and it creaked like bone. The road takes what it sowed, he said quietly. Every 7 years, the highway hungers, picks a stretch of desert, picks a storm, and it feeds. The fear turned into something colder, something that settled in my stomach like a stone. That is not an answer. That is not possible. You saw them, didn't? To you? In the white, his eyes bored into mine. The ones who got caught before you. The ones who stopped. The ones who got out of their cars. I thought of the abandoned sedan. The handprints. The open door. What are they? Echoes, he whispered. Everyone who ever disappeared on this highway during a whiteout. They are still here. Still driving. Still walking. Still looking for a way out that doesn't exist. He gestured toward the window, where the storm pressed against the glass like something alive. And every 7 years, the road adds more. My mind was screaming that this was impossible, that this was insane. But my body remembered the shapes moving through the storm, the breathing that came from nowhere and everywhere, the snow that moved beneath my feet. How do I get out? The old man, his smile widened. Same way everyone tries. You wait for dawn, and you drive. But here, it's the thing about the whiteout. It didn't like to let go. He reached beneath the desk and pulled out a key attached to a turquoise plastic tag. Room 7. You'll need a place to wait. Inside, where they can to reach. Not directly. I took the key because I had no choice. My hands were still shaking. Have you been here the whole time? During the storm. I've been here longer than that. His voice had gone distant, hollow. Longer than you can imagine. Someone has to keep the lights on. Someone has to watch. I backed toward the door, the key cold in my palm. Watch for what? For the ones who make it through, and the ones who don't. He turned back to his desk, picking up a pen, beginning to write in a ledger that looked ancient. Room 7. Dawn, to open the door for anything. Dawn, to listen to the voices. And whatever you do, dawn, to look out the window after midnight. I wanted to ask more, needed to ask more, but something in his tone told me the conversation was over. I pushed back out into the storm, and the breathing started again immediately, closer now, more eager. I ran across the parking lot, the snow grabbing at my feet, and found room 7. The door opened with a key that felt too heavy, too old. Inside, the room was exactly what I expected from a forgotten desert motel. A bed with a comforter the color of rust, a television that probably predated cable, a bathroom with tiles that had cracked decades ago, a window with thin curtains that did nothing to block the white outside. I locked the door, fastened the chain, pushed the single chair under the doorknob for good measure. My phone was dead. My car keys sat heavy in my pocket, worthless until dawn, if dawn ever came. I sat on the bed and tried to steady my breathing, tried to tell myself this was just a freak storm, just a coincidence, just my imagination working overtime. Then the knocking started, soft at first, almost polite. 3 taps on the door. Pause. 3 more taps. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The old man, whose words echoed in my head, Don, to open the door for anything. The knocking grew more insistent. Now it was coming from multiple places. The door, the window, the walls themselves. Steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And underneath it, I could hear voices, muffled and distant, calling my name. How did they know my name? I pulled the thin blanket around me and tried to focus on anything else. The alarm clock on the nightstand, its red numbers glowing 9:47. The water stain on the ceiling shaped like a screaming face. The terrifying reality that I had no idea if I would survive until morning. At 10:23, the power went out. The darkness was absolute. No light from the parking lot. No glow from the clock. Nothing but the horrible white pressing against the window like something trying to give in. I didn't move from the bed. Couldn't move. The knocking had stopped, but something worse had replaced it. Scratching. Long, slow scrapes against the outside wall, moving from one end of the room to the other. Whatever was out there was testing the structure, looking for weakness, looking for a way inside. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Then came the voices again, clearer now, and I recognized them. My ex-wife, calling my name the way she used to. My father, dead for 5 years, asking me to let him in from the cold. My sister, her voice young, the age she'd been before the accident that took her. They knew exactly what would hurt most, exactly which ghosts would make me want to open that door. I clamped my hands over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, but the voices were inside my head now, growing louder, more desperate, more convincing. The scratching intensified. Something heavy hit the door, once, twice, testing the locks. At 11:47, the television turned on by itself. No power in the room, no power in the building, but the screen glowed with static, and in that static, I could see shapes moving. People walking through snow, cars abandoned on an empty highway, and something else, something tall and impossible, moving between them, feeding. I couldn't look away. The static resolved into images that I recognized. My car on the highway, me, driving, unaware, the shadow crossing the road ahead, and then the perspective changed, and I was seeing through its eyes. This thing in the storm. And I understood with crushing certainty that it had been following me for miles before the snow started. It had chosen me. The screen went dark at 11:58. The scratching stopped. The voices fell silent. The room filled with a tension so thick I could barely breathe. 2 minutes until midnight. 2 minutes until whatever the old man had warned me about. I should have kept my eyes closed. I should have turned away from the window. But human nature is a cruel thing, and curiosity is more powerful than fear. And when the clock struck midnight, I looked. The storm had stopped. The parking lot was perfectly still, covered in snow that gleamed under a moon that shouldn't to have been visible. And standing in the snow, arranged in a perfect circle around room 7, were the echoes. Dozens of them, hundreds, people in clothes from different decades, their skin pale, their eyes empty, all facing my window. All watching me. In the center of the circle stood the shadow I'd seen on the highway. Tall enough to scrape the sky, made of smoke and darkness and hunger. It had no face, no features, but I could feel its attention on me like a physical weight. And then I understood the horrible truth. The old man had lied. Or maybe he told me exactly what he was allowed to say. The room wasn't protection. It was a cage, a holding pen, and at midnight, the road made its choice about who it would keep and who it would release. The shadow moved toward my window. The echoes moved with it, shuffling through the snow like a funeral procession. I backed away from the curtains, my spine hitting the wall, nowhere left to go. The scratching started again, but this time it was underneath the room, clawing up through the floorboards. The door handle began to turn. I locked it. I chained it. I wedged the chair, but the handle turned anyway. Slowly, deliberately, and the chain began to stretch, the metal groaning under impossible pressure. Something was coming in, and I had one chance, one desperate play. The bathroom window. I ran, throwing open the bathroom door, climbing onto the toilet, wrenching at the small window above. It was painted shut, decades of neglect sealing it tight. Behind me, I heard the room door splinter, heard the chain snap, heard something enter that wasn't human and had never been human. The window gave way. I squeezed through, my shoulders scraping the frame, and dropped into the snow behind the motel. The breathing was everywhere, the storm starting again, the white closing in. But ahead, maybe 50 yards away, I could see my car. Could see the highway beyond. I ran. The snow grabbed at me. The echoes reached for me. The shadow moved through the storm behind me with terrible purpose. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I reached my car, threw myself inside, and turned the key with hands that could barely grip. The engine caught. The headlights blazed into the whiteout. And I drove, foot pressed to the floor, tires spinning and then catching and then launching me forward onto the highway. The storm raged around me. The breathing filled the car. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I drove for what felt like hours, the white never lifting, the terror never fading, until suddenly, like passing through a membrane, the snow was gone. The sky was clear, the stars were bright, and the highway stretched ahead, normal and empty and silent. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Full signal. The radio crackled back to life, playing some cheerful morning show. The GPS recalculated, showing I was 30 miles from Reno. The temperature gauge read 94 degrees. I pulled over on the shoulder, my whole body shaking, and looked back the way I'd become. The highway was empty. No storm, no snow, no sign that anything had happened at all. But in my rearview mirror, just for a second, I saw it. A tall shadow standing on the side of the road, watching me go. And I knew, with the certainty of someone who barely escaped, that it was still out there, still waiting, still hungry. The road takes what it is owed every 7 years. I made it to Reno, made it to my interview, made it home, but I take different routes now. Never Interstate 95, never through that stretch of Nevada desert. And whenever I see snow, even in winter, even when it is supposed to be there, I remember the breathing in the storm. I remember the echoes watching from the parking lot. And I remember that some roads don't want you to leave. They want you to stay forever. Another shadow in the whiteout. Another voice calling the next driver, his name. Another warning that no one will believe until it is too late. The highway is still out there. It's still hungry. And in 7 years, it will feed again. Story 2. Storm came too fast. I should have known something was wrong when the radio died exactly at mile marker 147. No static, no fade, just silence, like someone had flipped a switch inside the dashboard of my truck. The highway stretched ahead through the Wyoming wilderness, empty and gray under a sky that looked bruised and swollen. I was 3 hours from anywhere that mattered, hauling equipment back to Denver after a job site inspection in some forgotten mining town. The forecast had called for snow, sure, but not until midnight. I had time, or so I thought. The first flakes appeared at 4:32 p.m. I remember because I glanced at the clock right when they started, thinking how pretty they looked in the dying afternoon light. Soft and delicate, drifting down like ash from some distant fire. Within 10 minutes, those delicate flakes became a wall of white that turned the world into a terrifying blur of motion and shadow. The storm came too fast. Impossibly fast. One moment I could see the yellow line on the asphalt. The next moment I was driving blind, my headlights reflecting off a churning mass of snow that seemed almost alive. I slowed to a crawl, knuckles white on the steering wheel, trying to find any landmark, any sign of the road. My phone showed no signal. The GPS froze on a blank screen. And then I saw it through the whiteout, a dark shape rising from the storm like a shipwreck emerging from fog. A building, some kind of old roadside structure, maybe a rest stop or abandoned gas station. I did not care what it was. I just needed to get off the road before I drove into a ditch or worse. The parking lot was buried under 3 inches of fresh snow, already accumulating at a horrifying rate. I killed the engine and sat there, listening to the wind scream around the truck cab. The sound was not natural. Wind howls and whistles, sure, but this was different. This sounded like voices, dozens of them, all talking at once in some language I could not quite understand. I told myself it was just the storm, just the way the air moved around metal and glass. But my hands were shaking as I pulled my coat tight and prepared to make the dash to the building. The cold hit me like a physical blow. Not just cold, but a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to reach inside my chest and squeeze. I ran through knee-deep drifts toward what I could now see was an old motel. 2 stories, maybe 20 rooms, with a faded sign that read, Ponderosa Lodge, in letters that had lost most of their paint to time and weather. The office door was unlocked. I stumbled inside, gasping, covered in snow that melted instantly in the relatively warmer air. The lobby smelled like dust and mildew and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. A long counter stretched along one wall, and behind it hung a board with numbered keys on rusted hooks. The power was out, but gray light filtered through the dirty windows, enough to see by. Enough to notice that every single key was still hanging on its hook. Every room supposedly empty, I called out, my voice sounding small and foolish in the silence. No response, just the muffled roar of the storm outside and that weird, unsettling quiet that old buildings have, like they are holding their breath. I grabbed a key at random, number 14, and decided to wait out the storm in a room rather than the creepy lobby. I would be fine, the storm would pass, someone would plow the roads by morning. These were the lies I told myself as I climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor, fighting against wind that seemed determined to push me back. Room 14 was at the far end of the building, last door on the right. The key stuck in the lock, but with some force, it turned. The door swung inward on hinges that shrieked like something dying. Inside was exactly what I expected. A saggy double bed with a brown comforter, a battered dresser, a television from the 1980s sitting on a stand, and a bathroom with yellow tile. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but otherwise, the room looked recently abandoned, like the occupants had just stepped out moments before. That was when I noticed the wet footprints on the carpet. They led from the bathroom to the bed, dark and distinct against the faded blue carpet. Fresh footprints. My heart started hammering in my chest as I followed them with my eyes. They stopped at the side of the bed, as if whoever made them had simply stood there, dripping, staring at the mattress. I checked the bathroom, half expecting to find someone hiding behind the mildewed shower curtain. Empty. The prints must have been old, I reasoned. Maybe from a leak, from condensation. But even as I thought it, I knew that was not true. Those prints were fresh, recent, and I was supposedly alone. I wedged a chair under the door handle and sat on the bed, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow piled against the window, blocking out what little light remained. By 5 o'clock, it was full dark, and the temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. I could see my breath. I pulled the scratchy comforter around my shoulders and waited, listening to the building creak and groan under the assault of wind and snow. That was when I heard the knocking. Not on my door, somewhere else in the building. A rhythmic tapping, like knuckles on wood, patient and persistent. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It moved along the second floor, passing door after door, getting closer. I sat frozen, barely breathing, as it approached. The knocking reached the room next to mine and stopped. Silence stretched for maybe 30 seconds. Then it continued, right outside my door. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I did not move, did not speak. The chair remained wedged under the handle. After a long moment, the knocking moved on, continuing down the walkway, fading into the storm. My mouth was dry as sand. My hands trembled so badly I had to clench them into fists. Someone else was here. Someone was checking every room, knocking on every door, looking for something. Looking for someone. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time became strange and elastic in the darkness. I could not tell if I was awake or drifting into some nightmare state where the walls seemed to breathe and shadows moved independently of any light source. Then I heard the voices. Not the wind this time. Actual voices, coming from the room directly below mine. Muffled but distinct. A conversation. Multiple people talking in low, urgent tones. I pressed my ear to the floor and listened. The words were garbled, distorted, but I caught fragments. Something about the storm. Something about being trapped. Something about how they had been waiting. The tone was wrong, though. Not frightened or frustrated, but excited, eager, like they were happy about the situation, pleased that someone new had arrived. The conversation went on for several minutes, then stopped abruptly. Footsteps crossed the room below. A door opened and closed. Then silence again, thick and suffocating. I needed to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my truck and drive. Storm or no storm. I removed the chair from the door and opened it a crack, peering out into the darkness. The walkway was buried under snow, the railing barely visible. Wind tore at my face, and in that wind, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Singing. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing an old lullaby my grandmother used to hum. The melody drifted through the storm, sourceless and eerie, rising and falling with the gusts. I slammed the door and wedged the chair back in place. My phone was still dead. No signal, no power. I was alone in this nightmare, cut off from everything. And something was very wrong with this place. The wet footprints on the carpet had multiplied. Now they led from the bathroom to the bed, then from the bed to the door, then back to the bathroom in an endless loop. Fresh water pooled on the carpet. The room smelled like lake water in decay. Around midnight, the power flickered on. Just for a second, the old television sparked to life with a burst of static, showing nothing but white noise and darkness. Then it cut out again, plunging me back into shadow. But in that brief moment of light, I saw something that made me want to scream. Written on the bathroom mirror in what looked like condensation or maybe something worse were two words. Still here. I did not sleep, could not sleep. I sat with my back against the headboard, watching the door, listening to the building settle and creak. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the knocking started again, but this time it was different. This time it was frantic, desperate, like someone was trying to break through every door at once. The sound moved around the building in a chaotic pattern, hammering on wood and glass, accompanied by that same woman, his voice singing her disturbing lullaby. The storm outside reached a fever pitch, howling with such violence that I thought the roof might tear away. Then everything stopped. The knocking, the singing, even the wind fell silent. The sudden absence of sound was more terrifying than the noise had been. I waited, heart pounding, for what would come next. That was when I heard it, the slow scrape of metal on metal. Someone was trying keys in locks, one after another, working their way down the line. My lock rattled. The knob turned slowly, testing the resistance. The chair under the handle held, but barely. Something pushed against the door with inhuman strength, and I could hear breathing on the other side. Wet, labored breathing, like lungs filled with fluid. The door shuddered in its frame. The chair legs scraped against the floor. I grabbed the only weapon I could find, a lamp with a heavy base, and prepared for whatever was about to come through. The pressure built and built, the door bending inward, and then suddenly released. Footsteps retreated down the walkway, fading, gone. But I knew with absolute certainty that it would be back. Whatever was in this place, it was patient. It could wait. It had been waiting a long time. Dawn came slowly, the storm finally beginning to ease as gray light filtered through the snow-covered window. I moved the chair and opened the door to find the walkway empty, pristine white snow covering everything like nothing had happened. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, just perfect, unmarked snow stretching in both directions. I descended the stairs on shaking legs and made my way to the office, thinking maybe I could find a landline, some way to call for help. The lobby looked different in the morning light. Wrong somehow. The keyboard behind the counter no longer showed all keys present. Now several were missing, including the key to room 14. My key, the one I had left upstairs. Scattered across the counter were wet footprints, dozens of them, overlapping and chaotic, as if a crowd had gathered there during the night. And written in the dust on the counter, traced by an invisible finger, were the words, "You should not have stayed." I ran to my truck, fell twice in the deep snow, picked myself up, and kept going. The engine turned over on the third try, and I backed out of that parking lot without looking in the rearview mirror. I drove through snow that was already melting in the morning sun, taking curves too fast, not caring, just needing to put distance between myself and that horrible place. The highway was passable, barely, and I did not stop until I reached a gas station 40 miles down the road. The attendant looked at me like I had lost my mind when I tried to explain. He told me there was no Ponderosa Lodge on that stretch of highway. There had been one once, he said, but it burned down in 1987. Killed everyone inside. Some kind of accident with the heating system during a freak snowstorm that came too fast for anyone to evacuate. They never rebuilt it. The land sat empty now, just trees and wilderness. He showed me a map. There was nothing at mile marker 147. Nothing at all. I drove back to Denver in silence, my mind trying to process what had happened. When I got home, I found my boots still caked with melting snow. And in that snow, pressed into the treads, were fragments of carpet fiber. Blue carpet fiber, the same shade as the carpet in room 14. I threw the boots away, tried to forget. But some nights, when the wind picks up and the temperature drops, I swear I can hear it. That woman, this voice, singing her lullaby, carried on the storm. And I know, with absolute certainty, that somewhere on that empty stretch of highway, The Ponderosa Lodge is still standing. Still waiting. Still checking rooms. Still looking for guests who make the mistake of staying when the storm comes too fast. Once visibility is gone, instinct takes over. Story 3. White Mile. I should have turned back the moment my phone lost signal, but Highway 89 stretched empty before me, and I told myself another 20 miles wouldn't matter. That was 3 hours ago. Now I'm writing this while my hands can still move, before the cold takes that away too. The terrifying thing about disappearing ISN, the fear of dying. It's knowing you made every wrong choice that led you there, and understanding with perfect clarity that nobody will ever find out why. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 42 years old. I left Flagstaff at 2 in the afternoon on December 18th, heading north toward Page. The weather report mentioned possible snow. Nothing alarming. Light flurries, they said. Maybe an inch. I've driven through worse 100 times. I loaded my Jeep with the usual gear, kissed my wife Sarah goodbye, and promised I'd decall from the motel. A routine drive through the Arizona high desert. 70 miles of empty highway between me and a warm bed. The first flakes appeared around mile marker 47. Soft and lazy, drifting across my windshield like ash. Beautiful, actually. The kind of snow that makes you remember childhood. Within 15 minutes, those delicate flakes transformed into a wall of white that swallowed the road. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. Then 20. Then I couldn't see past my hood. That is when my navigation stopped working. The GPS screen flickered once, twice, then displayed a spinning wheel that never resolved. No satellite connection. My phone showed no signal, no direction, nothing but a useless black mirror reflecting my increasingly worried face. The last landmark I passed was a boarded-up gas station with a faded Texaco sign, miles behind me now. I tried remembering how far back that was. 5 miles? 10? The snow had erased all sense of distance and time. I slowed to 15 miles per hour, leaning forward against the steering wheel, searching for the yellow line that should mark the road, its edge. The line appeared and disappeared in the whiteout, playing tricks with my depth perception. Several times I felt my tires drift onto the shoulder, that sickening crunch of gravel under snow, and I overcorrect back toward what I hoped was the center. The highway had no guardrails here. Just open desert dropping away into darkness on either side. The smart choice would have been stopping. Pull over, wait out the storm, conserve fuel. But something about the emptiness surrounding me felt wrong. Not just lonely, wrong. Like the landscape itself had shifted when I wasn't looking, rearranged itself into something that only resembled the Arizona I knew. The snow fell without sound. That is what unnerved me most. A blizzard should roar, should announce its presence with wind and chaos. This snow descended in eerie silence, muffling everything except my breathing and the steady hum of the engine. I saw the car around mile marker 52. At first, just a dark shape emerging from the white curtain ahead. A sedan, off the shoulder, nose down in the ditch. Fresh snow covered the hood, but not completely. It couldn't have been there long. Maybe an hour, maybe less. I stopped. Engine running. Hazards blinking uselessly into the storm. The sedan sat at an angle. Driver, his side tilted up. The windows were dark. No lights. No movement. My heart hammered as I zipped my coat and stepped into the freezing wind. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since I stopped looking at the dashboard. My breath crystallized instantly. The snow came up past my ankles. Each step required real effort, pushing through the accumulation. I approached the sedan slowly, that primal instinct screaming at me to get back in the Jeep and drive away. But you don't leave someone stranded in a blizzard. You just don't. That is not how people survive out here. The driver, his window was down. Not broken, down, deliberately opened. Snow had piled inside, covering the seats, the steering wheel, the dashboard. The keys hung in the ignition. The fuel gauge read half full. Nothing wrong with the car that I could see. No flat tire, no visible damage. Someone had simply opened the window, climbed out into a blizzard, and walked away. That's when I noticed the footprints. A single set, leading from the driver's side door directly into the desert. Not toward the road, not following the highway in either direction, straight out into the empty wasteland, as if the person knew exactly where they were going. The prints were already filling with fresh snow, but I could trace them maybe 50 yards before they vanished completely into the white darkness. I called out. My voice disappeared into the storm without echo. The silence pressed back against me, heavy and suffocating. I tried again, louder this time, and heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter, distant and thin, coming from the direction of those footprints. A woman's laugh, high and bright, like someone had just heard the funniest joke in the world. Then it cut off abruptly, leaving only the whisper of falling snow. I ran back to my Jeep, hands shaking. I threw it into drive and pressed the accelerator harder than I should have. The wheels spun briefly before catching, and I lurched forward into the storm. In my rearview mirror, the abandoned sedan disappeared within seconds, swallowed by the blizzard. But I kept watching, terrified I'd see a figure standing beside it, watching me flee. The highway curved ahead, or I thought it did. The GPS remained dead, and I realized with creeping horror that I hadn't seen a mile marker in over 20 minutes. The road felt wrong beneath my tires. Too smooth, too straight, like I was driving on ice, though my wheels had traction. The yellow line had vanished completely. I was navigating by instinct alone, hoping the dark strip beneath the snow was actually asphalt and not some other surface entirely. That was when the radio turned on by itself. I hadn't touched it, hadn't bumped any controls. The power button sat in the off position, but static erupted from the speakers anyway, loud enough to make me jump. I twisted the knob, trying to shut it off, but the volume wouldn't respond. The static shifted, and underneath it I heard something that sounded like voices. Dozens of them, whispering in a language that hurt to hear. Not Spanish or Navajo or any tongue I recognized. Something older, something that should have stayed buried. I ripped the faceplate off the radio. The static continued, now emanating from somewhere deeper in the dashboard, as if the entire Jeep had become a conduit for whatever frequency I stumbled onto. The voices grew clearer, and I realized with dawning terror that they were counting. Backwards, in English now, but with that same wrong quality that made my teeth ache. 97, 96, 95. A deer appeared in my headlights. I slammed the brakes, and the Jeep slid sideways before stopping inches from the animal. It stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, head lowered, antlers catching the light. Its eyes reflected wrong, not the normal green shine you see at night. These glowed a deep, bloody red, like taillights in a fog. The deer didn't move, didn't startle or run. It simply stared at me with those horrifying eyes while the voices in my dashboard counted down through the 80s. I honked the horn. Nothing. Revved the engine. The deer remained motionless, a statue carved from shadow and fear. Then it smiled. Its mouth twitched or it looked friendly. The deer's face split horizontally below its eyes, revealing rows of human teeth, white and perfect and completely wrong on an animal's skull. The smile widened until the jaw dislocated with a wet crack I could hear through the windshield. I screamed and floored the accelerator. The Jeep lurched forward, and I braced for impact, but the deer was simply gone. Not running away, just absent, as if it had never existed. My headlights cut through empty snow. The static voices reached 57 and kept counting. My fuel gauge dropped to empty. The engine coughed once, twice, then died. I coasted to a stop in the middle of what I desperately hoped was still Highway 89. The voices stopped at 33, leaving behind a silence so complete I could hear my blood moving through my veins. The snow had stopped falling. I sat in the dead Jeep, watching my breath fog the windshield, and realized the temperature inside had plummeted. I could see frost forming on the interior, spreading across the glass in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Almost like writing. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of the shapes, when something tapped on my window. A hand, pale and thin, with fingers too long and joints that bent in too many places. It pressed against the glass, leaving no condensation, no warmth. The fingernails were black and cracked, and as I watched in frozen horror, they began scratching at the window. Not trying to break through, writing, the same symbols that the frost had formed, now carved into the condensation from outside. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The hand withdrew, and a face appeared in its place. Human, mostly. A woman with dark hair plastered to her skull, skin the color of old snow, eyes that held nothing but hunger and terrible intelligence. She tilted her head, studying me like a specimen in a jar, and I recognized her coat. The same expensive North Face jacket I'd seen on the mannequin in the sedan, its passenger seat, half buried under snow. She opened her mouth, and more of those symbols poured out, visible in the air like smoke. drifting toward my window. Where they touched the glass, the surface began to crack, spiderweb fractures spreading from each point of contact. I scrambled into the back seat, then into the cargo area, as far from that window as possible. My hand found the emergency kit, and I grabbed the flare gun without thinking. The woman, his face followed my movement, tracking me through the windows, that horrible smile never wavering. More hands appeared, 5, 10, 20, pressing against every window, all writing those same symbols, all cracking the glass simultaneously. The rear window shattered first, freezing wind poured in, and with it came that laughter again. Multiple voices this time, men and women and children, all laughing at some cosmic joke I couldn't understand. Hands reached through the broken window, those elongated fingers stretching toward me, and I fired the flare gun straight up through the Jeep, the sunroof. The magnesium burst ignited with blinding intensity, turning the world into a photograph negative. The hands retreated instantly, and the laughter transformed into shrieks that didn't sound remotely human. I caught glimpses of figures retreating into the darkness, dozens of them, moving in ways that defied anatomy and physics. The flare arced high into the sky, and in its red light I finally saw where I was. Not on Highway 89. Not on any road at all. The Jeep sat in the center of a perfectly circular clearing, surrounded by standing stones that thrust up from the desert floor like broken teeth. Each stone bore those same symbols, weathered and ancient, and I understood with sickening certainty that this place had been here long before highways, before Arizona, before anything I would recognize as civilization. The flare began to fall, the darkness rushed back in, and with it came the figures, moving faster now, angry and purposeful. I grabbed everything flammable I could find, paper maps, the owner's manual, emergency blankets, and stuffed them into an empty coffee can. Used my lighter to create a makeshift torch. The flames caught just as the flare hit the ground and died. The figures stopped at the edge of my firelight. I counted 17 of them, all wearing the clothes of travelers and tourists, all with that same wrong quality to their movements. They swayed in unison, like trees in a wind I couldn't feel, and began to hum. The sound vibrated in my chest, making my heart skip beats, trying to match their rhythm. I held the torch high and ran, not toward the Jeep, not back the way I'd come, because I had no idea which direction that was anymore. I ran toward the smallest gap between the standing stones, praying that beyond them lay actual desert, actual reality, actual escape. The humming rose to a shriek. The figures lunged forward, and I felt hands grab my coat, my backpack, my hair. I dropped the torch and threw myself between the stones, and the world twisted sideways. I hit the ground hard, rolling down an embankment, and came to rest face down in snow. Real snow, cold and wet and absolutely normal. Above me, I heard the distant sound of an engine. I looked up and saw headlights approaching, a semi-truck barreling down Highway 89 at full speed. I was lying in the ditch beside the road, 20 feet from the asphalt. The truck passed without stopping. Then another car, then an RV. Normal traffic, normal night. The snow had reduced to light flurries. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a dozen missed calls from Sarah. Full signal. The time read 9:15 p.m. 7 hours since I left Flagstaff. It should have been 4:30, maybe 5 at the latest. I climbed onto the highway and looked back. The desert stretched away into darkness, empty and still. No clearing, no standing stones, no figures, just sagebrush and sand under a thin blanket of snow. But I know what I saw. I know where I was. And I know those things are still out there, waiting in that place between places, for the next person who drives just a little too far into the storm. They're still counting down. I can hear them sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet. 33, 32, 31. I don't. Do you know what happens when they reach 0? I don't. Want to know? My Jeep was discovered 3 weeks later, 80 miles off Highway 89, sitting in the middle of the Kaibab National Forest with a full tank of gas and no mechanical problems. The doors were locked from the inside. The windows were intact, and carved into every surface, inside and out, were symbols that linguists still can identify, written in a substance that DNA testing confirmed was human blood. But not mine. The blood belonged to 73 different people. Hikers, campers, drivers, all reported missing in Arizona over the past 40 years. All last seen on Highway 89 during snowstorms. I don't drive at night anymore. I don't to leave town when weather reports mention snow. And I never, ever stop for stranded vehicles, no matter how much my conscience screams at me. Because out there in the darkness, in the places our maps done to show, things are waiting. Things that wear our faces and speak our names and count down towards something terrifying. The snow is falling again tonight. And somewhere out in that white silence, I know they were still waiting for me to come back and finish what we started. The number they stopped at wasn't random. 33. I looked it up. In ancient Hebrew mysticism, it is the number that represents the divine name. The point where heaven touches earth. The threshold between worlds. They recalling me back. Every snowflake that falls whispers my name. Every shadow in my peripheral vision wears the face of that woman from the sedan. Sarah thinks I need therapy. Maybe I do, but no therapist can explain the symbols that sometimes appear on my bathroom mirror when the steam clears. No medication can stop the humming I hear when I'm alone in the dark. I am writing this as a warning. If you driving through northern Arizona and the snow starts falling too quietly, if your GPS stops working and the highway feels wrong beneath your tires, if you see a vehicle abandoned with the window down and footprints leading into the desert, keep driving. Don, to stop. Don, to investigate. Don, to let your humanity override your survival instinct. Because out there in the white mile, the stretch between somewhere and nowhere, they were always hungry. Always counting. Always waiting for the next person foolish enough to believe they can help. And if you hear laughter in the storm, pray we're already too far away to matter. Story 4. Car stopped moving. The engine died at exactly 3:47 in the morning, and that is when I realized the snow had buried us alive. Not stalled, not sputtered, just stopped, like someone had reached under the hood and ripped out something vital. My wife was asleep in the passenger seat, our 2 kids unconscious in the back, and through the windshield, all I could see was white. Pure, suffocating white that pressed against the glass like it was trying to get inside. We'd been stuck on this mountain road in the Colorado Rockies for 6 hours. What should have been a simple drive home from our ski vacation had turned into something else entirely when the blizzard hit. The kind of storm that comes out of nowhere, the kind weather forecasters call historic, the kind that kills people who make stupid decisions. I made a stupid decision. The heating vents hissed cold air now, useless without the engine. I tried the ignition again. Click, click, nothing. My breath started fogging in front of my face, visible even in the darkness of the car, this interior. The temperature was already dropping. Fast. Outside, the snow was piling up at an impossible rate. I watched it through the night, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Snow doesn't accumulate that quickly. It shouldn't cover a vehicle in hours. But it had risen past the wheel wells around midnight, past the windows by 2, and now it was creeping over the roof, a white ceiling closing in above us. This wasn't natural. Nothing about this was natural. My phone showed no signal, had shown no signal since we had gotten stuck. The last text I managed to send was to my brother, telling him we'd taken the old mountain pass instead of the highway, telling him we'd be fine. That message felt like a lifetime ago now, like words from a different person who still believed in things like rescue and mourning and seeing his family again. I needed to think, needed to stay calm, but the fear was already there, creeping through my chest like ice water. We had maybe half a tank of gas left. The car was dead, the snow was still coming down, and we were alone on a road that maybe 3 cars used per day in good weather. In this storm, we might as well have been on the moon. I reached over and shook my wife's shoulder gently. Sarah woke with a start, her eyes wide and disoriented in the darkness. I watched her register where we were, watched the hope drain from her face as she looked at the snow pressed against her window. She didn't ask if the car was fixed. She could hear the silence, feel the cold. She looked back at our kids, Emma, 7, Jake, 9, both still sleeping, their breath coming in small white clouds. How long before the cold woke them? How long before they understood the danger we were in? Sarah turned back to me, and I saw the question in her eyes. The question I'd been asking myself for the past hour. How do we survive this? I told her I was going outside to clear the exhaust pipe, to see if maybe we could get the car running again, get some heat going. It was a lie. The car was dead in a way that had nothing to do with snow in the tailpipe. But I needed to see how bad things really were. Needed to face it without scaring the kids. Opening the door took all my strength. The snow had packed against it, creating a wall of white resistance. I pushed hard, my shoulder screaming, and finally it gave way. I squeezed through the gap into the nightmare outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow. Negative numbers. Wind that cut through my jacket like it wasn't there. And the snow. Oh God, the snow. It was already up to my chest. And I was standing on what should have been the road. The storm was so thick I couldn't see 5 feet in any direction. The world had disappeared, replaced by this churning white darkness. I waded toward the back of the car, every step a battle against the weight and depth of the snow. My legs were already going numb. The wind screamed in my ears. A sound like voices, like something calling from very far away. I reached the rear of the vehicle and started digging at the exhaust pipe with my bare hands. That's when I found the first one. A hand. Blue-white, frozen solid, reaching up from beneath the snow like it was trying to grab my ankle. I jerked back, my heart slamming against my ribs, my mind refusing to process what I just touched. I dropped to my knees and started digging frantically, clearing away the snow around the hand, following the arm, uncovering the shoulder, and then the face. A man, maybe in his 50s, eyes open and frosted over, mouth locked in a screen. He was wearing a business suit under a thin jacket, completely wrong for these mountains, completely wrong for this weather. And he'd been here for a while, long enough for the snow to pack around him, long enough to become part of the road itself. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The horrifying part was that he wasn't alone. As I stared at the frozen corpse, my eyes adjusted to the darkness and the storm. And I started to see them. Shapes in the snow. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Bodies buried under the white, scattered across the road in the surrounding forest like some kind of mass grave. Some recent enough that I could make out their features. Others just vague human-shaped lumps that could have been there for years. This wasn't a road. This was a graveyard. The fear turned into full-blown panic. I scrambled back toward the car, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind racing. How many people had gotten stuck here? How many had died waiting for rescue that never came? And why were there so many? I pulled myself back into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. Sarah took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. I couldn't tell her, couldn't explain what I'd seen. The kids were starting to stir in the back seat, and I needed to hold it together. But my hands were shaking. My mind was screaming, and the snow kept falling, heavier now, faster, like it was eager to add us to its collection. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard. She pointed out the windshield, and I followed her gaze into the storm. Something was moving out there, a dark shape, tall and wrong, passing between the buried cars I could now barely make out through the white. It moved against the wind, steady and purposeful, like it was searching for something. Like it was searching for us. I tried the ignition again, my hands fumbling with the keys. Click, click, click. Dead. Completely dead. The shape outside was getting closer. I could see it more clearly now through gaps in the storm. It wasn't the human. Too tall, too thin, moving in a way that defied the deep snow, gliding across the surface like it weighed nothing. Emma started crying in the back seat. She'd woken up, seen the snow pressing against the windows, felt the cold seeping into the car. Jake woke next, his voice small and scared, asking why it was so dark, why the car wasn't moving, why Mom looked so frightened. The shape stopped about 20 feet from the car, just stood there in the storm, a black silhouette against the white. Watching, waiting, and I understood with terrible clarity that this thing, whatever it was, had something to do with all those bodies. This was its road, its hunting ground, and the snow was how it trapped its prey. We had to move, had to get out, had to run. But where? We were surrounded by snow taller than my kids. The temperature was still dropping, and that thing was out there, patient and hungry and unnatural. Sarah was whispering prayers under her breath. The kids were both crying now, their fear feeding off ours. I reached into the back seat and told them to put on every piece of clothing they had, every layer, everything warm. My voice was steadier than I felt. I told them we were going on an adventure, that we needed to be brave, that everything would be okay. Another lie. Everything was very far from okay. I pulled out my phone one more time, desperate, and that is when I saw it. A single bar of signal, weak, flickering, but there. I dialed 911 with frozen fingers, my heart hammering, and miraculously it connected. The operator, His voice was broken and distant, cutting in and out. But I managed to give our location. Managed to say we needed help immediately. The call dropped. The signal vanished. But maybe, just maybe, someone would come. The shape outside moved closer. It was at the hood of the car now, and I could see it better. It had the rough outline of a person, but stretched and distorted, like someone had taken a human shadow and pulled it too tall, too thin. Where its face should have been is just darkness, a void that seemed to absorb what little light existed. It placed something on the hood, a hand, or what might have been a hand once. Long fingers that spread across the metal like roots, like it was testing the car, feeling for us inside. The metal groaned under the pressure. The windshield cracked, just a small fracture spreading from the center. The thing was trying to get in. I told everyone to get out. Now, passenger side, away from that thing. We piled out into the snow, and it was even worse than before. The storm had intensified, the wind strong enough to knock Jake off his feet. I grabbed him, pulled him up, and started pushing forward into the white. Sarah had Emma, both of them struggling against the depth and weight of the snow. Behind us, I heard the windshield shatter, heard the metal of the car buckling and twisting. The thing was tearing it apart, looking for us, furious that we escaped. We waded through the snow, making maybe 10 feet per minute. The kids crying, my wife praying, my own mind blank with terror. I had no idea where we were going. No plan beyond getting away from that thing. The cold was already working its way through our layers, promising frostbite and hypothermia and death. That is when I saw the light, faint, orange, flickering through the storm maybe 100 yards ahead. A building, a cabin, something with walls and warmth and shelter. I pointed it out to Sarah, and we pushed toward it with everything we had left, dragging the kids through snow that wanted to swallow them whole. The thing was following. I could hear it moving behind us, a sound like branches breaking, like ice cracking. It was faster than us, so much faster, but it seemed to be holding back, like it was playing with us, like it knew we had nowhere to go. We reached the cabin, and I hammered on the door with fists that could barely feel anything. The door opened, and an old woman stood there, her face deeply lined, her eyes knowing. She looked past us into the storm, saw what was coming, and pulled us inside without a word. The cabin was warm, impossibly warm. A fire burned in a stone fireplace that looked like it had been there for 100 years. The interior was simple. One room, a bed, a table, shelves lined with jars of preserved food and bundles of dried herbs. The old woman locked the door behind us, threw a heavy bolt, and placed her hand flat against the wood. She whispered something I couldn't understand, words in a language that predated English, and the door seemed to settle, to strengthen. She turned to us, and her expression was sad, pitying, like she'd seen this before, like she knew how this ended. She told us the storm had been here for 60 years, that it came every winter, longer each time, stronger each time, that the thing outside was the storm, was part of it, was born from it, that it fed on travelers who got stuck, who made the mistake of taking this road when the snow started falling. She told us she'd been keeping this cabin as a refuge, a last hope for people like us. But the storm was getting stronger. The thing outside was getting hungrier. And every year, fewer people made it to her door. She told us we had until dawn. When the sun rose, the storm would retreat, the thing would disappear, and we'd have a chance to get down the mountain. But dawn was still hours away, and the thing outside was patient. We huddled by the fire, my kids pressed against me, my wife, his hand gripping mine so hard it hurt. Through the cabin, a single window, I could see the shape circling outside, moving around the building in a slow, deliberate pattern. Testing, searching. The old woman sat in a rocking chair and watched it with eyes that had seen too much. She told us about the others who made it this far, about how some had lasted until dawn, about how others had made mistakes, had opened the door, had given in to the voices the storm sent to trick them. She told us not to listen if we heard our names, not to respond if we heard loved ones calling, not to believe anything the storm promised. The hours crawled by. The thing outside grew more aggressive. It scratched at the walls. It hammered on the door. It pressed against the window until the glass bowed inward. And it called to us. It used Jake's voice, crying for help. Used Sarah's mother's voice, saying she'd come to rescue us. Used my own voice, telling myself to let it in, that everything was safe now. The kids covered their ears. Sarah closed her eyes. I watched the door, watched the window, watched the old woman as she sat perfectly still, her lips moving in that strange language, keeping whatever magic held this place together from breaking. At 6:15, just as the sky started to lighten, the thing let out a sound like nothing I'd ever heard. Part scream, part wind, part something that had never been human and never would be. The cabin shook, the fire guttered, and then, slowly, the presence outside withdrew. The storm began to fade. The wind died. The snow stopped falling. The old woman stood and opened the door. The road was visible now in the gray dawn light, buried under 15 feet of fresh snow. Our car was gone. Crushed completely. Nothing but twisted metal barely visible beneath the white. And scattered everywhere, partially uncovered by the retreating storm, were the bodies. More than I thought. Dozens and dozens of them, frozen in their final moments of terror. The old woman gave us supplies. Heavy coats, food, a map. She told us to follow the road down, to not stop, to not look back. She told us we'd been lucky, that most people never found the cabin, that most people became part of the graveyard. She told us the storm would be back next winter, longer, stronger, and eventually, even her magic wouldn't be enough to hold it back. We walked down that mountain in silence. It took 6 hours through the deep snow. We were picked up by a search and rescue team that had been looking for us since my 911 call went through. They asked what happened, asked how we survived, asked about the cabin. When we led them back up the road 2 days later, after the snow had been cleared, there was no cabin. Just forest, dense and old and undisturbed. The search team looked at us like we were crazy, like we suffered some kind of hypothermia-induced hallucination. But I know what I saw. I know what chased us. I know about the bodies buried under that snow. And I know they were still there, waiting for the next winter, the next storm, the next travelers who make the mistake of taking that road. The car stopped moving at 3:47 in the morning. And sometimes, late at night, when I hear wind howling outside our house, I swear I can still hear it calling my name. The storm is patient, the storm is hungry, and the storm always comes back. Snowstorms don't just block roads, they trap decisions. Story 5. Between Millbrook and Ashford. The thing about getting lost is that you never realize it is happening until it's already too late. One moment you are on a familiar road, and the next you are somewhere that looks almost right but feels completely wrong. That is what happened to me on Route 47, and I'm still not sure I ever really made it back. Have you ever driven the same stretch of highway so many times you could do it blind? That is how well I knew the road between Millbrook and Ashford. 18 miles of straight blacktop cutting through Missouri farmland. I made that drive twice a week for 6 years, visiting my father in the nursing home. 30 minutes door to door. I could time it down to the minute. But on the night of November 14th, that short drive became something else entirely. Something impossible. And the terrifying part is that I'm not the only one that this happened to. My name is David Marsh. I am a high school teacher from Millbrook, 47 years old, married with 2 kids. Normal life, normal guy, the kind of person who doesn't believe in ghosts or UFOs or anything that can be explained with logic and reason. I am telling you this so you understand that what I am about to describe didn't happen to some crazy person looking for attention. It happened to me, and it could happen to you. The storm rolled in around 7 that evening. Nothing unusual for November in Missouri. Dark clouds, temperature drop, that electric feeling in the air before the rain starts. I left the nursing home at 7:45, same as always, after helping my father with dinner. The first drops hit my windshield as I pulled onto Route 47 heading north toward home. Within 5 minutes, the rain became a downpour. The kind that turns your windshield into a waterfall even with the wipers on full speed. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet. I slowed down, turned on my hazards, and settled in for a slower drive than usual. No big deal. I'd driven through worse. That's when I noticed something odd. The mile markers weren't matching up with the time. I'd been driving for 15 minutes but had only passed 2 markers. That didn't make sense. Even going slow, I should have covered at least 8 or 9 miles. I checked my speedometer. 40 miles per hour. Steady. The math wasn't working. I tried my phone to check GPS, but there was no signal. Just a blank screen where the bar should be. That wasn't normal either. Route 47 has coverage the whole way. I've never lost signal on this road, not once in 6 years. The uneasiness started then, that creeping sensation in your gut that tells you something is wrong even when you can to pinpoint what it is. The rain hammered down harder. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness. I should have passed Johnson's farm by now, the big red barn that marks the halfway point. But there was nothing, just empty fields on both sides, stretching away into the storm. I kept driving, telling myself I somehow missed the barn in the downpour, that I was being paranoid. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Still no barn, no houses, no intersections, nothing but that endless stretch of wet blacktop disappearing into the rain. The horrible realization crept over me slowly. I was lost between two towns I'd connected 1,000 times. Lost on a road with no turns, no exits, nowhere to actually get lost. That's when I saw the lights ahead, red tail lights glowing through the rain like dying embers. A car, maybe a quarter mile ahead, driving the same direction. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone. Someone else was on the road. I accelerated slightly, closing the distance, planning to follow them into Ashford. At least I have company until this nightmare drive ended. But as I got closer, something about those taillights seemed wrong. They weren't moving away from me. They maintained the exact same distance, no matter how fast I drove. 45, 50, 55 miles per hour. The gap never changed. The other car stayed locked exactly a quarter mile ahead, as if we were connected by an invisible tether. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The fear I'd been pushing down started to rise, cold and sharp in my chest. I eased off the gas, dropping back to 40. The taillights slowed too, perfectly synchronized. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. It was like watching my own reflection, except the reflection was ahead of me instead of behind. I tried flashing my high beams. No response. The car ahead just kept driving, maintaining that impossible, fixed distance. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I couldn't make out the vehicle, its maker model. Just those two red lights, burning steady through the storm. The dashboard clock read 8:30. I'd been driving for 45 minutes. Route 47 from Millbrook to Ashford takes 30 minutes in perfect weather, maybe 40 in a storm. I should have been home by now, helping my son with his homework, having a normal Thursday evening. Instead, I was trapped in some horrifying loop, following phantom taillights through an endless night. That is when I noticed the trees. There shouldn't be trees on Route 47. The road cuts through open farmland, nothing but fields and fence posts. But now, pressing in from both sides, I could see dark shapes looming through the rain. Trees, thick trunks and heavy branches forming a canopy overhead. The road had narrowed too. What had been a wide two-lane highway now felt like a country back road, barely wide enough for two vehicles. The environment had changed around me, transformed while I was focused on those taillights. The creeping dread became full-blown terror. I was no longer on Route 47. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that wore the road, a skin like a mask, and I had no idea how I'd gotten there or how to get back. I slammed on the brakes. The car fishtail-ed on the wet pavement before coming to a stop in the middle of the road. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. The taillights ahead stopped too, still that same fixed distance away, still perfectly synchronized with my movements, as if the car ahead wasn't really a separate vehicle but some kind of projection, a lure drawing me deeper into this twisted version of reality. The silence was absolute. No rain on the roof, no wind, no engine noise from the car ahead. I realized with mounting horror that I couldn't hear my own engine either, even though the dashboard showed the car was running. The world outside had gone completely, unnaturally quiet. Something tapped on my window. 3 times, deliberate. I turned my head, moving slowly, dreading what I might see. A face stared back at me through the rain-streaked glass, pale and drawn, with hollow eyes that held no light. The face of a man around my age, wearing a soaked dress shirt and tie. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the window in the impossible silence. He pointed behind me, down the road I just traveled. His expression was urgent, pleading. He tapped again, harder this time, and I saw his fingernails were torn and bloody, as if he'd been clawing at something for a long time. He pointed again, more insistently, and I finally looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was gone. Where there should have been asphalt and tree-lined darkness, there was nothing. Absolute blackness. A void that swallowed light and space and everything I understood about reality. The trees on either side of the road simply ended at that wall of nothing, their branches dissolving into the dark. I screamed and floored the accelerator. The car lurched forward, tires shrieking on wet pavement, and I chased those taillights deeper into the nightmare. The man, his face vanished from my window. In the mirror, I watched the void expand, rushing forward like a wave, consuming the road behind me meter by meter. Trees disappeared into it, the painted lines vanished. Everything the darkness touched simply ceased to exist. The taillights ahead grew brighter, closer. I was gaining on them. The gap that had remained fixed for so long was finally closing. 50 yards, 40, 30. I could see the outline of the vehicle now through the rain. A sedan, dark blue or black, Missouri plates. It looked completely normal, completely real. And that somehow made everything worse. 20 yards, 10. I was right behind it now, close enough to see a bumper sticker that read, Ashford Elementary. Close enough to see the back of the driver, his head silhouetted against the windshield. Close enough to realize with stomach-churning certainty that the driver's head was turned completely around, facing backward, staring at me with eyes that reflected my headlights like an animal. I swerved hard to the left to pass, and the other car vanished. Just blinked out of existence like a television turning off. My headlights cut through empty rain. The road ahead was clear, and standing in the middle of the lane, maybe 50 feet away, was a child. A little girl in a yellow raincoat, hood up, facing away from me. She stood perfectly still in the downpour. I hit the brakes again, sliding to a stop 20 feet from her. My heart hammered against my ribs. The child didn't move. Didn't turn around. Just stood there in the middle of the road, a small yellow figure in the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to put the car in reverse and run, but the void was still behind me, still closing in. I was trapped between impossible choices. The child began to turn, slowly, and I knew with absolute certainty that I didn't want to see her face. That whatever was under that yellow hood was something my mind wasn't equipped to process. I closed my eyes and laid on the horn. The sound broke through the silence, loud and harsh and blessedly real. I held it down, that long angry blast cutting through the storm, and I prayed for something, anything, to change. The horn cut off abruptly. I opened my eyes. The child was gone. The trees were gone. The narrow road was gone. I was sitting on Route 47, the real Route 47, with open fields stretching away on both sides. Lights glowed in the distance. Buildings, houses, the welcome sign for Ashford stood 50 yards ahead, illuminated by my headlights. I checked the clock, 8:15. Only 30 minutes had passed since I left the nursing home. The exact right amount of time. The rain had stopped. My phone showed full signal. Everything was normal again, as if the last terrifying hour had never happened. But it did happen. I know it did. The proof is in the dashcam footage I reviewed when I got home. I'd forgotten I even had it running. The video shows me driving normally for about 15 minutes, then static takes over. Pure white noise for exactly 43 seconds. When the picture returns, I'm pulling into my driveway, safe at home. 43 seconds to account for a missing hour that the clock says never passed. I called the nursing home the next day to check their records. My father, his chart showed he left at 7:45, just like I remembered. But the security camera at the exit shows my car pulling out at 8:14. 29 minutes of missing time that exists in my memory but nowhere else. Here is the disturbing part. I started asking around. Quiet inquiries at the diner in Millbrook. Casual conversations with other people who regularly drive Route 47. And I found them. 5 other people who experienced the same thing. Lost time on that stretch of road. Phantom taillights, the narrowing road and pressing trees, the void closing in behind them. One was a truck driver who had been making the Millbrook to Ashford run for 20 years. He told me about the man in the dress shirt who appeared at his window, desperate and pleading. Another was a young mother who described the little girl in the yellow raincoat, standing in the road, turning slowly. They all seemed pieces of the same nightmare, scattered across different nights over the past 3 years. But here is what keeps me awake. We're not the only ones who've driven that road. Thousands of people travel Route 47 every week. Most of them make it through fine. Some of them don't There, as a memorial on the south side of the road, near the halfway point. 11 crosses marking 11 fatal accidents. Single vehicle collisions. Drivers who veered off the road for no apparent reason. No alcohol involved. No mechanical failures. Just good people in good cars suddenly leaving the road and crashing into nothing. I think about those crosses every time I drive past. I think about the man at my window, pointing frantically backward, trying to warn me. I think about the little girl in the yellow raincoat, turning to show me something I wasn't meant to see. And I wonder if they were warnings or if they were something worse. Echoes of people who didn't make it back. Ghosts trapped in the space between Millbrook and Ashford, trying to guide others out or pull them deeper in. The truly horrifying thing is that I don't have a choice. My father is still in that nursing home. I still need to make that drive twice a week. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I get in my car and head south on Route 47. And I pray that this time I'll stay on the real road. That this time I want to slip into that other place, that twisting nightmare version of a route I know by heart. Because the worst part isn't the fear or the confusion or even the missing time. The worst part is the certainty that one night, probably soon, I'll make that drive and I want to come back at all. I'll join the man in the dress shirt and the little girl in yellow, forever lost between two towns, trapped in an endless loop of rain and darkness and the void closing in from behind. Last Thursday I drove to Ashford again. The trip took 30 minutes exactly. Normal drive, normal weather, everything fine. But when I got home and checked my dash cam, there were 3 seconds of static in the middle of the recording. Just 3 seconds. This time, it's getting longer. The static is growing, and I know what that means. The thing that lives in the space between Millbrook and Ashford is getting stronger, or hungrier, or closer to pulling me all the way through. Next time it might be 5 seconds, then 10, then a minute, until eventually there's only static, and the person who drives into Millbrook never drives out of Ashford. I am writing this as a warning. If you live in Missouri, if you know Route 47, if you ever made that drive and felt something off, something wrong you couldn't quite explain, pay attention to your clock. Watch for the missing minutes. And if you see taillights ahead that never get closer, if the road starts to narrow and trees press in where there should be open fields, if a man in a dress shirt or a child in a yellow raincoat appears in front of you, turn around. Do whatever you have to do to get off that road, even if it means driving into the void itself. Because staying on the road means becoming part of it. And I don't think anyone who becomes part of Route 47 ever really leaves. They just keep driving, forever lost between two towns, waiting for someone else to join them in the darkness. Story 6. Screaming wind outside. The thing about cabin fever is that you never realize when it stops being a joke and starts becoming real. I had been alone in that ranger station for 6 days when I started hearing my name in the wind. Not imagining it, actually hearing it, clear as day. Mark, Mark, over and over, carried on the screaming wind outside that never seemed to stop. The storm had hit northern Montana harder than anyone predicted, dumping 4 feet of snow in 2 days and cutting off every road within 50 miles. My supervisor said help was coming. That was 3 days ago. My radio had gone silent yesterday. And now I was hearing voices in a storm that had grown so loud it drowned out every other sound. I need you to understand something right from the start. I am not the kind of person who scares easily. 38 years old, former Marine, 12 years with the Forest Service. I have spent weeks alone in the wilderness. I have tracked bears, fought wildfires, pulled people out of situations that would make most folks quit on the spot. Fear is something I thought I had figured out. But what happened in that station during those 9 days changed everything I believed about what is real and what is not. The ranger station sat at the edge of Black Pine National Forest, a small wooden structure built in the 70s that served as a waypoint for hikers and a monitoring post for fire danger. 2 rooms, a wood stove, shortwave radio, and supplies to last a month if needed. I was supposed to be there for a week, doing routine maintenance and filing reports. Easy assignment. The kind of job you do when you need a break from the chaos of the main office. But the storm came early, and it came with a violence that felt personal, like nature had decided to punish this specific patch of earth. By day 7, the screaming wind outside had become constant. Not howling, screaming, like thousands of voices all crying out at once in pain or rage or something worse. The sound penetrated the walls, got inside my head, made it impossible to think straight. I stuffed towels under the doors and covered my ears with pillows at night, but nothing helped. The wind found every crack, every gap, and pushed through with a horrifying intensity that made the entire building shake. That was when I started noticing the footprints in the snow. I first saw them on the morning of day 8. Fresh tracks circling the station, human-sized but wrong somehow. The stride was too long, the depth too shallow, as if whatever made them was barely touching the ground. They formed a perfect ring around the building, coming from nowhere and leading nowhere, just appearing in the fresh snow that had fallen during the night. I grabbed my rifle and went outside to investigate, fighting against wind so strong it nearly knocked me over. The tracks led into the tree line and vanished, just stopped, mid-stride, as if the thing making them had simply lifted off into the air. I followed the circle around the station, my heart pounding, and discovered something that made my blood run cold. Someone had built a cairn, a pile of stones stacked carefully in the snow, maybe 3 feet high, positioned directly in front of my door. Stones that had been buried under 4 feet of snow until someone or something had dug them out and arranged them with deliberate precision. I kicked the cairn over and went back inside, telling myself it had to be hikers. Someone stranded like me who had come looking for help. But I knew that was not true. Nobody could survive out there in this storm. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. The wind chill made it feel like 40 below. And those tracks, those impossible tracks that appeared and disappeared like something from a nightmare, were not made by anyone looking for shelter. The voices in the wind got worse that night. Not just my name anymore, but full sentences. Fragments of conversation that almost made sense but not quite. I heard my ex-wife's voice telling me she never loved me. I heard my dead father asking why I never visited his grave. I heard children singing nursery rhymes in a language I did not recognize. The screaming wind outside became a chorus of every fear and regret I had ever carried, amplified and distorted until I wanted to put my fist through the wall just to make it stop. Around midnight, the knocking started. Soft at first, almost polite. Tap, tap, tap on the wooden door. I called out, asked who was there, got no response. Just the wind screaming and that patient, persistent knocking. It went on for an hour, then 2, always the same rhythm, always the same spot on the door. I refused to open it. Something deep in my gut told me that opening that door would be the worst mistake of my life. On day 9, I woke to find the inside of the station covered in frost. Every surface coated in a thin layer of ice that sparkled in the weak morning light. The wood stove had gone out during the night, but that was not what scared me. What scared me was the message written in the frost on the window. 3 words, traced by an invisible finger from outside. Let me in. My hands shook as I relit the stove, trying to warm the place up, trying to rationalize what was happening. Condensation, I told myself. Temperature differential, some kind of natural phenomenon. But the letters were too perfect, too deliberate, and they were written from the outside, which meant something had been pressed against that window in the middle of the night, close enough to fog the glass, patient enough to write a message while I slept just feet away. That afternoon, the radio crackled to life for the first time in days. Static and white noise, then a voice. My supervisor, telling me a rescue team was coming, that they would be there by nightfall. Relief flooded through me so intensely I almost cried. But then the voice changed, dropped lower, became something that was not quite human. It said my name, said it was already here, said it had been waiting for me to invite it inside. Then the radio died with a pop and a smell of burning electronics. The screaming wind outside reached a new level that evening. So loud I could not hear my own thoughts. So loud the walls vibrated and dishes rattled in the cabinets. It sounded like a jet engine mixed with human voices mixed with something ancient and furious that had no name. I huddled by the stove, rifle across my lap, watching the door, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. The knocking returned at sunset. But this time it was not soft. This time it was violent, hammering on the door and walls and windows all at once, like a dozen fists trying to break through. The door shuddered in its frame. The windows flexed inward. I backed into the corner, finger on the trigger, shouting at whatever was out there to leave me alone. The hammering intensified, accompanied by a sound I will never forget. Laughter, high and cruel and wrong, barely audible under the screaming wind but unmistakable. Then it stopped. Sudden, complete silence except for my ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. I waited, not moving, barely breathing. Minutes passed. Nothing. The wind had stopped. The storm had gone quiet. After 9 days of constant noise, the silence was more terrifying than anything that had come before. I crept to the window and looked outside. The snow had stopped falling. The trees stood perfectly still, and in the clearing in front of the station stood a figure. Tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb light. It faced the station, unmoving, as if it had all the time in the world. As if it knew I was watching. I could not see its face in the darkness, but I felt its attention like a physical weight pressing against my chest. My phone buzzed. Impossible, because my phone had been dead for days. But there it was, lighting up with a text message from a number I did not recognize. The message read, "I showed you mine. Now show me yours." Below it was a photo, a picture taken from outside the station window, a picture of me, sleeping in my cot, taken sometime during the night. Someone had been inches away from me, separated only by a pane of glass, close enough to photograph me while I slept. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. When I looked back out the window, the figure was closer. Not walking, just closer, as if it had teleported 10 feet forward in the second I had looked away. My rational mind screamed that this was not real, that I was hallucinating from isolation and fear. But my body knew better. My body understood that I was in the presence of something that should not exist. The figure raised one arm and pointed at the door. The message was clear. "Open it. Let me in." I shook my head, mouthing the word no, even though I knew it could not possibly hear me. Or maybe it could. Maybe it heard everything. Maybe it had been listening to my thoughts this whole time, learning my fears, preparing for this moment. The screaming wind outside returned with a vengeance, so sudden and loud it felt like the building would explode. But this time I could hear words in it, clear as day. Not my name, not threats, just one phrase. The longer the storm lasts, the harder it becomes to think clearly. Story 7. Lights disappeared. The last thing I saw before the lights disappeared was a handprint on the window that should not have been there. I had been working the night shift at the Riverside rest stop off Interstate 90 in South Dakota for 3 months when the storm hit. January in the Midwest is brutal, but this was different. The Weather Service called it a once-in-a-generation blizzard. Wind gusts hitting 70 miles per hour. Temperatures dropping to 20 below. Visibility near zero. They told everyone to stay off the roads, to shelter in place, to wait it out. But I was already at work when the storm rolled in, and my supervisor said someone had to man the station in case stranded travelers needed help. That someone was me. The rest stop was a squat brick building with bathrooms, vending machines, and a small office where I sat for 8-hour shifts, mostly scrolling through my phone and watching cars come and go. On a normal night, maybe 50 vehicles would pull through. That night, as the storm intensified, the number dropped to a trickle. By 9 o'clock, the parking lot was empty except for my truck and one other vehicle. A silver sedan with out-of-state plates, covered in snow, that had been sitting there since before my shift started. Nobody inside, nobody around, just an abandoned car that gave me an uneasy feeling I could not quite explain. The wind picked up around 10, not gradually, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. It went from a steady background noise to a roaring monster that shook the building and sent snow swirling in hypnotic patterns across the parking lot lights. I locked the front doors and settled in, figuring I would be stuck here until morning when the plows came through. The coffee maker gurgled in the break room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Everything felt normal until I walked past the main window and saw it. The handprint, palm and 5 fingers pressed against the glass from outside. Fresh. So fresh that condensation still clung to the edges. I stopped dead, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The print was massive, easily twice the size of my own hand. And it was positioned 7 feet off the ground, far too high for someone to reach unless they were standing on something. I pressed my face to the window and looked down. No ladder, no footprints in the snow. Nothing, just that huge handprint, slowly fading as the moisture evaporated. I told myself it was old, from earlier in the day when some tall trucker had leaned against the window. But I knew that was not true. I cleaned these windows every shift. That print had not been there an hour ago. Someone or something had pressed their hand against that glass in the last few minutes, in the middle of a horrifying blizzard, and then vanished without leaving a trace. My phone showed no signal. The landline in the office was dead. I tried the radio we kept for emergencies, but all I got was static mixed with weird interference that almost sounded like voices. The feeling of isolation hit me hard. I was alone in this building, in the middle of nowhere, cut off from help, and something was outside in the storm. Something that left impossible handprints on windows. Around 11, the lights started flickering. Just quick pulses at first, barely noticeable. Then longer, The fluorescent tubes would dim almost to nothing before surging back to full brightness. Each time it happened, my heart rate spiked. I checked the breaker box in the back utility room, but everything looked normal. The generator was running fine. The flickering had no obvious cause, which somehow made it more unsettling than if I had found a tripped breaker or loose wire. That was when I heard the footsteps on the roof. Heavy, deliberate, walking from one end of the building to the other, directly above my head. The ceiling tiles shifted slightly with each step. Dust drifted down. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk and stood frozen, tracking the sound as it moved across the roof. It stopped directly above the office, right above where I was standing. Then came 3 loud bangs, like someone had dropped to their knees and slammed their fists against the roof 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. The lights flickered again, went out for a full 2 seconds this time. When they came back on, I was standing in a different kind of darkness. The parking lot lights were still working, casting their orange glow across the snow, but inside the building felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper, the corners too dark, and I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. I did a full walkthrough of the facility, checking every room, every closet, every stall in both bathrooms. Empty. Of course they were empty, but the feeling persisted, that crawling sensation on the back of my neck that humans get when predatory eyes are tracking their movement. I returned to the office and locked the door, even though I knew it was pointless. If something wanted to get in, a cheap lock was not going to stop it. The silver sedan in the parking lot was gone. I had not heard an engine start, had not seen headlights. One moment it was there, and the next time I looked, just a rough outline in the snow where it had been sitting. Fresh snow was already filling in the depression. Within minutes, it would be like the car had never existed at all. At midnight, during the worst part of the storm when the wind reached a fever pitch and visibility dropped to nothing, the lights disappeared. Not flickered, not dimmed, just went completely dead. The building plunged into total darkness, and in that first moment of blindness, I heard breathing. Close, right next to my ear. A wet, rattling sound that froze every muscle in my body. I fumbled for the flashlight, clicked it on with shaking hands, and swept the beam around the office. Nothing. I was alone, but the breathing continued for another 3 seconds before fading away, and I knew with absolute certainty that something had been standing right beside me in that darkness. The emergency backup lights should have kicked on automatically. That was code. That was the law. But they stayed dark. The only light came from my flashlight and the faint glow of snow through the windows. I tried the generator. Dead. I tried the breaker. Nothing. It was as if something had deliberately killed every source of power in the building, leaving me trapped in a horrifying darkness while the storm raged outside. I sat at my desk, flashlight clutched in both hands, and tried to think rationally. Power failures happen. Storms knock out electricity all the time. There was nothing supernatural about this. Nothing to be afraid of. But my body disagreed. My body understood that something was very wrong, that the normal rules did not apply to whatever was happening here. The scratching started around 1 in the morning. Slow and methodical. Something dragging across the brick exterior, moving along the wall from window to window. I tracked it with the flashlight beam, watching my own reflection in the glass as the sound passed by. When it reached the front door, it stopped. A long pause. Then the handle started to turn. Slowly. Testing. The lock held, but I watched in frozen terror as the handle rotated all the way to the right. Released, then rotated again. Someone was trying the door. Trying to get inside. I moved to the window next to the door and shone the light out into the storm. For just a moment, the swirling snow parted, and I saw it. A figure standing in the parking lot. Tall and impossibly thin, with arms that hung too long and a head that tilted at an unnatural angle. It wore no coat, no hat, nothing to protect it from the deadly cold. It just stood there, perfectly still, facing the building, facing me. And then the snow closed in again, and it was gone. My mind raced through possibilities. Hallucination, carbon monoxide poisoning, some kind of psychological break from isolation and fear. But the rational part of my brain kept coming back to the same conclusion. I had seen something real, something that should not exist, something that was hunting me. The tapping started next, on every window at once. Fingernails on glass, a coordinated assault from all sides of the building. The sound echoed through the dark facility, mixing with the howl of the wind to create a symphony of horror that made me want to curl up and scream. It went on for 10 minutes. 20. I lost track of time. Lost track of everything except that relentless tapping and the knowledge that whatever was out there was trying to get in. Then silence, sudden and complete. Even the wind died down to nothing. The temperature inside the building dropped noticeably. I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. Frost formed on the inside of the windows. And through that frost, on every single window, I saw them. Handprints, dozens of them, hundreds, covering every pane of glass, pressed from the outside, creating a pattern that looked almost deliberate. Almost like words. I walked closer to the nearest window, trying to make sense of the pattern. That was when I realized what I was looking at. The handprints formed letters, a message written in condensation and frost. 3 words that made my blood turn to ice. We're inside. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight across the dark facility. The beam caught movement. Just for a second, something ducking behind the vending machines. Something that moved with an inhuman fluidity that defied physics. I backed against the wall, trying to keep everything in view at once, knowing it was impossible. The building was too big. Too many hiding places. And now I was trapped in here with something that had found a way inside. The flashlight flickered. Battery dying. Of course it was dying. Because nothing could be easy. Nothing could work the way it was supposed to. I had maybe 10 minutes of light left, and then I would be in complete darkness with whatever was stalking me through this building. The thought was so terrifying I almost gave up right there. Almost lay down and waited for whatever was going to happen. But some primal survival instinct kept me moving, kept me searching for a way out. I made it to the back exit, the emergency door that led to the service area behind the building. The door was frozen shut. Ice had sealed it in the frame. I threw my shoulder against it, again and again, feeling the ice crack but not give. The flashlight beam grew weaker with each impact. The batteries fading, time running out, and behind me, in the darkness of the facility, I heard footsteps. Multiple sets, walking with purpose, coming closer. One more hit and the door burst open. I fell out into the storm, into snow that immediately soaked through my clothes and wind that cut like knives. The cold was shocking, brutal. But I ran anyway, stumbling through drifts, heading for my truck on the other side of the building. Behind me, the emergency door stood open, spilling darkness into the white storm. And framed in that darkness were shapes. 3 of them, 4 more, standing perfectly still, watching me run, making no attempt to follow, just observing, as if my escape was part of some game they were playing. I reached my truck and got the door open with numb fingers. The engine turned over on the first try, and I backed out of that parking lot without looking back. Drove through snow that should have been impossible to navigate, taking the interstate at 20 miles an hour, not caring where I went as long as it was away from that place. The storm broke an hour later, just stopped, as suddenly as it had started. By dawn, the roads were clear. Emergency crews were out. Life returned to normal, but I never went back to that rest stop. Never explained to my supervisor why I abandoned my post. Never told anyone what I saw. Last week, I heard on the news that the Riverside rest stop had been permanently closed. Structural damage from the storm, they said. But I know better. I know they found something in that building. Something that made them decide it was safer to tear the whole place down than try to understand what had been living in the walls. And sometimes, late at night when the wind picks up, I still see those handprints on my bedroom window. Still hear footsteps on my roof. Still feel that presence watching me from the darkness, waiting for its chance to finish what it started the night the lights disappeared. Story 8. Footprints filled with snow. The footprints were filling in behind me as fast as I could make them, and that was when I knew something was hunting me in these woods. Not following, hunting. There's a difference you feel in your bones when something ISN. They're just tracking your path but erasing all evidence you were ever there. Like it doesn't want anyone to find what is left of you when it is done. I'd been hiking the Appalachian Trail section near the Tennessee-North Carolina border for 3 days, a solo trip meant to clear my head after the divorce. 42 years old, out of shape, desperate for something that felt real. The forecast had called for light snow. What I got instead was a blizzard that came out of nowhere around noon, turning the familiar trail into something alien and hostile. The scary part wasn't the weather. It was the realization that I wasn't alone. I first noticed the other tracks around 2 in the afternoon. Footprints in the fresh snow, running parallel to mine about 20 yards to my left. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow. The stride between them was wider than any person could manage without running. Yet they were pressed into the snow with the steady, unhurried pattern of a casual walk. I stopped to examine them, My breath fogging in the freezing air, my heart starting to hammer with a fear I couldn't yet name. The prints were deep, whatever made them was heavy, but there were no toe marks, no tread patterns, nothing that suggested boots or shoes. Just smooth, elongated impressions that looked like they'd been pressed into the snow by something that only vaguely resembled human feet. Then I watched them fill in, not from new snow covering them. The snow was falling, sure, but not fast enough to explain what I was seeing. The footprints were collapsing inward, the edges crumpling, the depressions smoothing out like someone was erasing them with an invisible hand. Within 30 seconds, they were gone completely, leaving pristine snow where I'd just been staring at clear tracks. That is when the real fear started, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your instincts scream at you to run. I started moving faster, trying to put distance between myself and whatever had made those prints. But every time I glanced to my left or right, I see new tracks appearing in the tree line. Always parallel, always maintaining that precise 20-yard distance, always filling in almost immediately after forming, like the forest itself was conspiring to hide the evidence. The disturbing truth was starting to sink in. Whatever was out there could move without leaving lasting tracks. It could follow me, circle me, get closer, and I never know from its trail. The only reason I could see the prints at all was because I happened to look at the exact moment they were made. How long had it been following me? How close had it gotten while I was setting up camp last night? Sleeping in my tent, completely unaware. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally through the trees. Visibility dropped to maybe 15 feet. The trail had long since disappeared under the accumulation, and I was navigating by instinct and the occasional blaze mark on trees, those small painted rectangles that marked the official path. But even those were getting harder to spot through the churning white. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept moving, my legs burning with exhaustion, my face numb from the cold. I'd been hiking for 6 hours since the storm started, and I had no idea how much farther to the next shelter. The map in my pack was useless now. Landmarks had vanished, the trail was buried, and something was pacing me through the trees. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in these woods, didn't belong in any woods. A low, resonant hum, like a voice trying to form words but not quite making it, coming from somewhere to my right. It rose and fell with the wind, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. The sound wormed its way into my head, unsettling and wrong, triggering some primal fear response that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. I stopped walking, stood perfectly still, listened. The humming continued, joined now by another sound, footsteps, not crunching through snow like mine, but a soft padding sound, like bare feet on carpet. Getting closer, moving with purpose, I turned slowly, scanning the white chaos around me, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife on my belt. Not that a 4-inch blade would help against whatever was out there, but holding it made me feel slightly less helpless. A shadow moved between the trees about 30 feet away. Tall, so tall it shouldn't have fit between the trunks. It glided through the storm with an unnatural smoothness, never quite solid enough to make out clearly, never quite translucent enough to be dismissed as a trick of the snow and wind. My rational mind tried to explain it away. A deer, a bear, another hiker in dark clothes. But my lizard brain knew better. This was something else. Something that had been following me for hours, maybe days, waiting for the storm to cut me off from help, from witnesses, from any chance of escape. The shadow stopped. I felt it looking at me, though I couldn't see anything like eyes or a face. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from the shadow itself. The sound had a rhythm now, almost like speech, like it was trying to communicate something I wasn't too equipped to understand. Then it started moving toward me. Not quickly, not rushing, just walking with that same measured, purposeful stride I'd seen in the tracks. Each step brought it closer, brought it more into focus, and what I was beginning to see made my mind rebel against the input. It was shaped like a person, but stretched. Limbs too long, torso too narrow, head tilted at an angle that would break a human neck. Where its face should have been was just a smooth expanse of darkness, like someone had cut a person-shaped hole in reality and this thing was what leaked through. I ran, pure panic, pure survival instinct. I crashed through the snow, abandoning the trail, my pack bouncing against my back, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I could hear it following. Not running, still just walking, but somehow keeping pace, somehow staying close, the humming growing louder and more chaotic. My lungs were on fire. My legs were giving out. The snow was knee-deep in places, making every step a battle. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was maybe 10 feet behind me now, gliding over the snow without sinking, its two long arms swinging in a parody of human movement. I could see its hands, or what might have been hands once, fingers that split into too many joints, tips that tapered to points like bone needles. A root caught my foot and I went down hard, face first into the snow. The cold shocked my system, but adrenaline hauled me back to my feet almost immediately. The thing was right there, close enough to touch, close enough that I could feel the rawness radiating from it like heat, could smell something like ozone and decay. It reached for me with those horrible hands. I swung my pack around and hit it. The blow connected with something that felt too soft, like hitting a garbage bag full of water. The thing recoiled, the humming cutting off into a sound like a gasp, and I used that second to bolt in a different direction. My legs pumped mechanically. I wasn't thinking anymore, wasn't planning, just moving on pure animal terror. The trees were a blur. The snow was endless, and behind me, the thing had recovered and was following again, that awful humming resuming, building to something that sounded almost like laughter. Then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I was falling, tumbling down a steep embankment I hadn't seen through the storm. My body hit rocks and roots and frozen earth, each impact driving the air from my lungs, pain exploding in my ribs and shoulders. I landed hard at the bottom, sprawled in a drift of snow, my head spinning, my body screaming. I forced myself to look up. The thing stood at the top of the embankment, silhouetted against the white sky. It didn't follow, just stood there, watching, waiting. The humming had stopped. The silence was somehow worse. Then it turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing into the storm like it had never been there at all. I lay in the snow, gasping, my mind racing to process what had just happened. Why had it stopped? Why hadn't it followed me down? Was this its territory boundary? Or was there something about this place, this ravine, that it couldn't or wouldn't cross? I pulled myself to my feet, checking for injuries. Bruised ribs, scraped hands, a gash on my forehead bleeding into my eye. But nothing broken, nothing that would stop me from moving. That's when I noticed the cabin. Small, ancient, tucked against the ravine wall about 50 yards downstream. Barely visible through the snow, but definitely there. Smoke was rising from a stone chimney. Someone was inside. Relief flooded through me so intensely I almost collapsed again. Shelter, warmth, another human being. I stumbled toward it through the snow, my body running on fumes, my mind clinging to the hope that I was finally safe. The door was unlocked. I pushed inside and was immediately hit by the heat from a wood stove burning in the corner. The cabin was one room, maybe 15 feet square. A cot, a table, shelves lined with supplies, and sitting at the table, an old man watching me with eyes that were far too calm for someone who just had a half-frozen stranger burst into his home. He gestured to a chair without speaking. I collapsed into it, my whole body shaking from cold and exhaustion and fear. The old man poured something hot from a kettle on the stove into a metal cup and slid it across the table. I drank without thinking, the liquid burning down my throat, tasting like herbs and smoke. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough from disuse. He told me I'd been lucky, that most people who encountered the thing in the woods didn't make it to the ravine, that it hunted these mountains, had hunted them for longer than anyone could remember, that it only came out in storms, when the snow could hide its tracks, when isolation made its prey vulnerable. He told me the ravine was a boundary, something about the old Cherokee burial ground beneath us, something about the way the land folded here, kept the thing from crossing. He built this cabin 40 years ago after his own encounter, after watching it take his hiking partner while he ran. He stayed to warn others, to provide shelter for the few who made it this far. He told me the tracks filling in with snow was the first sign, that the thing existed partially outside normal space, that its weight on the world was temporary, that it left marks that reality itself wanted to forget. He told me I'd done the right thing by running to lower ground, that it preferred the ridges and high places, that it was stronger there. He told me I had to wait until the storm passed, that trying to hike out now, even staying in the ravine would be suicide. That the thing would be waiting at the boundaries, patient and hungry. I stayed in that cabin for 2 days while the storm raged outside. The old man barely spoke after that first explanation. He'd stare out the small window at the white chaos, his expression haunted, like he was seeing things I couldn't. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with a look that might have been pity or might have been something else. On the second night, I woke to find him standing over my cot, his face barely visible in the dying light of the stove. He told me something then that I wish I could unhear. He told me the thing in the woods didn't just hunt. It marked people, that surviving an encounter meant carrying a piece of it with you. That it could always find you again, no matter where you went, no matter how far you ran. He told me he tried to leave these mountains a dozen times over the years. Each time, he'd see the tracks. Each time, he'd hear the humming. Each time, he barely made it back to the cabin before it caught him. He was a prisoner here, sustained by whatever force kept the thing out of the ravine but unable to truly escape. He told me I'd probably end up the same way. That the mark was already on me. That I could go home, try to resume my life. But I always see the tracks filling in with snow at the edges of my vision. Always hear the humming in the wind. Always feel it getting closer. The storm broke on the morning of the third day. The old man gave me supplies and directions back to the main trail. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't wish me luck. Just watched from the doorway as I climbed out of the ravine and started the long hike back to civilization. I made it out, called for rescue, spent a night in a hospital being treated for frostbite and hypothermia. Told everyone I'd gotten lost in the storm, that I'd found an old hunting cabin, that I'd been lucky. No one asked about the old man. No one went looking for the cabin. And when I tried to describe its location, I realized I couldn't. The memory was fuzzy, dreamlike, like my brain didn't want to hold on to the details. That was 6 months ago. I'm home now. Divorced, alone, trying to rebuild a life that feels increasingly hollow. And the old man was right. I see the tracks. Not often, but enough. In fresh snow outside my apartment building. In mud after a rainstorm. Always filling in almost as fast as they appear. Always maintaining that precise distance. The humming comes late at night when I'm trying to sleep. Soft, distant, building slowly like it's getting closer. I just stopped going into the woods. Stopped going anywhere isolated. But I don't think that matters anymore. The thing in the mountains marked me. It knows where I am. And someday soon, when the conditions are right, when the snow is falling and I'm vulnerable and alone, it's going to come for me. The footprints fill with snow to hide the evidence. But some hunts never really end. They just wait for the right moment to finish what they started. In heavy snow, time stops meaning anything. Story 9. Last mile marker I should have stopped driving 3 hours ago. That is what everyone told me later, when they found me. But out there on that empty highway at 2 in the morning, exhausted and desperate to reach my daughter, this house before dawn, I convinced myself I could make it. Just one more hour, one more stretch of darkness. That's when I saw the mile marker that shouldn't exist. Mile 317 appeared in my headlights like any other, white and reflective against the Nevada desert night. But I passed mile marker 317 20 minutes earlier. I knew because I checked my GPS at that exact spot, calculating how much farther I had to go. Now here it was again, impossible and real. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through absolute darkness. No other cars, no buildings, just the yellow dividing line pulling me forward and the terrifying certainty that something was deeply wrong. My hands tightened on the wheel as a creeping, unsettling fear began crawling up my spine. I told myself I was hallucinating from exhaustion. 56 years old, driving through the night after a 12-hour shift at the warehouse. My eyes were playing tricks. Had to be. But when I passed mile marker 317 for the third time, I knew this wasn't fatigue. This was something else entirely. Something horrifying and deliberate. The GPS on my phone had gone dark. No signal. The last town I passed was Hawthorne, population 800. Now somehow vanished behind me into an impossible distance. I pressed the accelerator harder, watching the speedometer climb to 80, then 90. The mile markers kept appearing. 315, 316, 317, then 315 again. The loop was tightening. It's when I noticed the shadows moving alongside the highway. They weren't animals, The shapes were too tall, too angular, moving with an unnatural fluidity that made my stomach turn. They kept pace with my car effortlessly, gliding through the desert scrub like oil spreading across water. I couldn't look directly at them. Every time I tried, my eyes would slide away, refusing to focus, and a sharp, chilling pain would spike through my temples. The radio had been dead since I entered this stretch of road, but now it crackled to life. Static at first, then underneath, barely audible, a voice. Distorted, repeating the same words over and over. Turn around, turn around, turn around. The voice sounded like my own. Aged and desperate, calling from somewhere impossibly far away. I couldn't turn around. Behind me was only darkness now, thick and absolute, as if the road itself was being erased. The only choice was forward, through this nightmare, through this terrifying loop that had swallowed me whole. Mile marker 317 appeared again, and this time something was different. Standing beside it was a figure, human-shaped but wrong in every detail. Too tall, arms hanging too low, head tilted at an angle that would snap a normal person's neck. As my headlights swept across it, the figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed west, toward the desert. I should have kept driving, should have ignored it, but something about that gesture felt like a command, an instruction I couldn't resist. Against every screaming instinct, I turned the wheel and left the highway. The dirt road appeared suddenly in my headlights, as if it had materialized just for me. Narrow and winding, it cut through the desert like a scar. The shadows followed, now surrounding my car on all sides, hurting me deeper into the darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every horror story I'd ever heard flooded my mind, but nothing prepared me for what I found. The motel emerged from the night like a wound in reality. Single story, maybe 12 rooms. Its neon sign flickering the word vacancy in sick green light. The paint was peeling, the parking lot empty except for one other vehicle. A rusted pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. Every window in the motel was dark except one, room 7. A faint, eerie yellow glow pulsed behind its curtains. I stopped the car but kept the engine running. The smart thing would be to reverse, find the highway again, escape this creepy place. But the shadows had formed a wall behind me now, dense and writhing, blocking any retreat. The only path was forward, always forward. The motel office door stood open. Inside, an old woman sat behind the counter, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She didn't move as I approached, didn't acknowledge my presence. On the counter between us sat a single brass key attached to a plastic tag. Room 7. I don't need a room, I said. My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence. I need directions back to Highway 95. The woman, his head tilted slightly. When she spoke, her voice was dry as desert sand, barely a whisper. Rescue is coming, but not fast enough. Then she pushed the key toward me with one gnarled finger. The phrase froze me, those exact words. I heard them before, years ago, in a nightmare so disturbing I woke in screaming. A dream about being lost, about being hunted, about waiting for help that arrived too late. But that was just a dream. This was real. This was happening. I took the key. My fingers felt numb, disconnected from my body. The metal was ice cold despite the desert heat that had been baking everything just hours ago. The woman still hadn't looked up. I realized with creeping horror that I couldn't see her face under that hat. Just shadow. Deep, endless shadow where a face should be. Room 7 was at the far end of the building. The walk there felt like crossing into another dimension. Each step brought a new wave of fear, a new certainty that I was making a terrible mistake. But my legs kept moving, carrying me forward as if controlled by something outside myself. The key slid into the lock smoothly, too smoothly, like it had been waiting. The room was exactly what I expected and nothing I could have imagined. A bed, a chair, a small bathroom visible through an open door. Everything coated in decades of dust and neglect. But on the bed lay items that made my blood turn to ice. My wallet, my watch, the photograph of my daughter I kept in my glove compartment. All arranged carefully, deliberately, as if someone had been expecting me. The terror that gripped me then was absolute. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident or wrong turn. This was planned, orchestrated. I'd been brought here for a reason. And that reason was standing in the bathroom doorway. It was me, older, weathered, wearing the same clothes but covered in years of desert dust. Its eyes were hollow, empty sockets that somehow still saw. Its mouth moved, forming words without sound. I understood anyway. The message was clear and horrifying. You never left. They've been here for 17 years. Rescue was delayed. Help is coming, but not fast enough. I ran, burst from that room and sprinted toward my car, lungs burning, heart exploding in my chest. But the parking lot had changed. Now there were dozens of vehicles. Hundreds. All different makes and models spanning decades. All covered in dust. All abandoned. And standing beside each one was a shadow version of its driver, hollow-eyed and waiting. My car was still running. Still real. I threw myself inside and slammed the accelerator, tires screaming against gravel as I rocketed away from that nightmare motel. The dirt road twisted and turned, and suddenly I was back on the highway. Mile marker 317 flashed past, then 318, 319. The loop was broken. I drove straight through until dawn, never stopping, barely breathing. When I finally reached my daughter's house in Reno, the sun was rising, and everything felt safe again. Normal. I told her I made good time, that the drive was uneventful. I didn't mention the motel or the loop or the shadows. But 3 days later, I found something in my jacket pocket that I know wasn't there before. The brass key from room 7. And attached to it, a note in handwriting I recognized as my own, though I'd never written it. The message was simple and chilling. Rescue was delayed 17 years. Next time, it might be longer. The highway remembers. The desert keeps what it takes. And every driver who passes mile marker 317 after midnight enters the loop eventually. Some escape, some done. You barely made it. But here, it's the truly terrifying part. You have to drive home eventually. I still have that key. I keep it in a drawer I never open. And I've never driven that highway again. Never risked the darkness between Hawthorne and Reno. Because I know now what waits there. I know that somewhere in the Nevada desert, there is a version of me still trapped in that loop, still waiting in room 7, still hoping that rescue will come fast enough. The scariest part, I said, what happened? It is knowing it is still happening. Right now, forever. Story 10. What they found after the storm. The snow stopped falling on the 7th morning, and that is when I found my own corpse in the basement. Not a body that looked like me. My actual corpse, wearing the same clothes I had on, with my wedding ring and the scar on my left hand from a table saw accident 3 years ago. The truly horrifying part was that it had been dead for weeks. I am a 42-year-old insurance adjuster from Denver, and I'd driven up to assess storm damage on a farmhouse outside of Estes Park. Simple job. Document the roof collapse, take photos, file the report. The blizzard hit while I was inside, and what should have been a 2-hour visit turned into a week-long nightmare that destroyed everything I thought I understood about reality. The Hutchinson farmhouse sat 3 miles off the main road, isolated by fields that stretched endlessly in every direction. The family had evacuated before the storm, leaving me alone to do my inspection. When the snow started, it seemed manageable. Then the wind picked up, visibility dropped to nothing, and my car became a useless heap of metal buried under 6 feet of powder. The temperature plummeted to dangerous levels. I had no choice but to stay. The house was old, built in 1887 according to the property records, but sturdy. The power was out, but there was a working fireplace and enough canned food in the pantry to last weeks. I settled in, figuring the storm would pass in a day or two. I was wrong. The snow kept falling. The wind kept screaming. And on the second night, I heard footsteps above me. Heavy boots crossing the floor upstairs, slow and deliberate. Back and forth, in the same pattern for hours. The creepy thing was that I could feel the vibration through the ceiling, could hear the boards creaking under the weight. But I was alone. The family had left. I checked every room. The fear that gripped me was primal and immediate, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your breath catch. I grabbed a fireplace poker and climbed the stairs, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The second floor was empty. No footprints in the dust. No signs of disturbance. But the moment I came back downstairs, the footsteps started again. Same pattern. Same rooms. Like whoever was up there was waiting for me to leave before continuing their eerie, endless pacing. Sleep became impossible. The footsteps continued every night, joined on the third night by scratching sounds inside the walls. Not mice or rats. The scratches were too loud, too rhythmic, following me from room to room. And underneath it all, barely audible. A sound like breathing. Slow and labored, as if something massive was inhaling and exhaling just behind the plaster. On the fourth day, I found the photographs. They were in a box in the hall closet, hundreds of them dating back decades. Family photos, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. Normal stuff, except in every single photo, standing in the background or visible through a window or reflected in a mirror, was a figure. The same figure. Tall and impossibly thin, wearing dark clothes. Its face always turned away from the camera or hidden in shadow. It appeared in photos from the 1950s, the 1970s. Last year, always there, always watching the family. The disturbing implication was clear and terrifying. That night, I saw it. The figure was standing in the hallway outside my bedroom door, perfectly still, silhouetted against the faint glow from the fireplace downstairs. I froze, unable to move or breathe. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it turned and walked away, its footsteps the same heavy boots I'd been hearing, and descended the basement stairs. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to break a window and take my chances in the deadly storm. But something else took over, a chilling compulsion I couldn't resist. I followed it down into the darkness. The basement was unfinished, just dirt floors and stone foundation walls. My flashlight beam cut through the blackness, revealing old farm equipment and shelves of mason jars. The figure was gone, but there, in the center of the room, was something that made my blood turn to ice. A perfect circle of disturbed earth, about 6 feet in diameter, with a shovel leaning against the wall nearby. I started digging. Do you know why? My hands moved on their own, scooping away the loose dirt, going deeper and deeper. The fear I felt was overwhelming, but I couldn't stop. 1 foot down, 2 feet, 3. My fingernails split, my palms bled, and then I hit something solid. Not wood, not metal, fabric. I brushed away the dirt and exposed a shoulder. A jacket. My jacket, the same North Face parka I was wearing. I dug faster, uncovering more. A face emerged from the earth. My face, eyes frozen open in an expression of absolute terror. The corpse was me, down to the smallest detail, and it had been in the ground long enough to start decomposing. The horror of that moment shattered my sanity. I scrambled out of the hole, screaming, clawing my way up the basement stairs. But the house had changed. The layout was different. Rooms were in the wrong places. Doors led to spaces that shouldn't exist. I ran through a nightmare maze of impossible architecture, the walls breathing around me, the floor tilting and shifting beneath my feet. I found myself back in the basement, standing over the grave. The corpse was gone, but now there were others. Dozens of holes, each containing a body. All of them were me. Different ages, different states of decay, but all undeniably me. Some looked days old, others were nothing but bones. One was fresh, still warm, as if it had just been buried. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The storm hadn't trapped me here. I was already dead, had been dead, would be dead. Time in this house didn't work the way it should. Every version of me that had ever come here, that would ever come here, was buried in this basement. The entity that lived in the farmhouse collected us, wearing us down with fear and isolation until we died, then started the cycle over with the next version. The figure appeared at the top of the basement stairs. In the flashlight beam, I finally saw its face. It was the original owner of the farmhouse, a man named Hutchinson who had gone missing in 1923 during a blizzard. The newspaper clipping I found in the property files came back to me. He'd been snowed in, alone, and when they found him in the spring, he'd gone insane. The article said he dug dozens of holes in his basement, claiming he was burying versions of himself that kept appearing. They thought he was crazy. He wasn't. He discovered what the house did, what it had always done since it was built on cursed land. It existed in all times simultaneously, a trap that caught the same souls over and over, feeding on their fear and confusion. Hutchinson had become part of it, the caretaker of the nightmare, doomed to repeat the process forever. The snow stopped falling on the 7th morning. I found my corpse in the basement. Then I found the others. Then I understood. When the rescue team arrives, they'll find me alive, traumatized but whole. I'll tell them about the storm, the isolation, the fear. I'll leave out the rest. They'll never find the graves. The basement floor will be undisturbed, because this is just one layer of the loop. In another version of the farmhouse, another me is already dead. In another, I am still upstairs, hearing footsteps for the first time. In another, I'm just pulling up to do the inspection, unaware of what is waiting. The house exists in all these moments at once, a horrifying knot in time that can be untied. I am writing this from my hotel room in Denver, 3 weeks after the rescue. The report is filed, the farmhouse is condemned, but I know the truth. I am still there. I am always there. Every night when I close my eyes, I am back in that basement, digging, finding myself, understanding too late that there is no escape from a nightmare that exists outside of time. The Hutchinson family was never real. The property records were false. The farmhouse has no legal address. It only appears during storms, waiting for travelers who take a wrong turn, insurance adjusters responding to fake claims, anyone unlucky enough to need shelter when the snow starts falling. And the most terrifying part, I started seeing that figure in my mirrors, standing behind me, wearing my face, getting closer each time, because now I'm part of the cycle too. Now I am one of the things the house uses to lure in the next version. The next me who will drive up that non-existent road, seeking a farmhouse that only exists in the spaces between moments, during storms that rewrite reality. The snow is falling in Denver tonight, the first real storm of the season, and I can feel the house calling, pulling me back, because what they found after the storm wasn't just my corpse. It was the truth. The house never lets go. It never stops hunting. And somewhere, right now, another version of me is pulling up to a farmhouse, checking property records, preparing to do a simple inspection. I want to warn him, but I can, because I'm already there, waiting in the shadows, wearing his face, becoming the thing he'll fear most. The loop continues. The storm never really ends. And what they found after the snow stopped falling was just the beginning of an endless, horrifying cycle that defies death itself.